Hello guys, welcome back to another video on Lawgics. Today we're interviewing another person. Today we're interviewing Shannon Zolo. He will be here to talk about law and ethics combined, but in the corporate field of law. So let's get right into it. You might introduce yourself?
It's a pleasure to be here, Shiva. Look forward to this interview.
Yes. So let's get right into it, I guess. How did you get into law?
So I did my undergrad in business management, and a friend of mine at the time was taking the LSAT, and he asked me if I wanted to take the LSAT with him. I didn't even know what the LSAT was, and I said, sure. And so I basically started studying for the LSAT, and I sort of took it just as an experiment. I ended up doing pretty well in it, and I was able to get into some decent law schools, and so I decided to pursue law school. I did know because of my background that I would be, meaning having studied business management in undergrad, I knew that it was highly likely if I became a lawyer that I would want to pursue corporate law.
Yeah. So corporate law is also like one of the branches of law that I'm kind of going towards, that I might be going towards. Can you kind of like tell us how it kind of works?
100%. So a corporate lawyer really is sort of a business-centric person that advises individuals who might be business owners, individuals who might be investors, as well as companies that are selling a product or a service. And there are different aspects of corporate law that one can perform. But the area that I'm most heavily involved in is called M&A, or mergers and acquisitions. And so I typically spend a lot of my day advising clients that are either buying or selling businesses. And when I do that, I interact with sometimes the owner of the business, sometimes the president of the business, sometimes the board of directors of the business, and sometimes the investors in those businesses. And I try to give them advice as to how they should be thinking about buying or selling that company. In terms of what that involves when you're doing a deal, there's usually a purchase agreement, and that's heavily negotiated. It can be 50 to 100 pages. And then there are some what they call ancillary or extra agreements that are cover things like an employment agreement for someone that might be working for the business, an assignment agreement where you're assigning certain intellectual property and things of that nature. And so there's a lot of work involved when you're negotiating a transaction. So at a high level, in terms of corporate law and mergers and acquisitions, that's where I spend my time.
That's really interesting. So, because Lawgics is a website where we focus on ethics and law, how does ethics play a role in corporate law?
Well, it's a good question. And what I can say to you is that as a lawyer, generally, your clients are placing a great deal of trust in you to represent their best interests. And as a consequence of having their trust and being able to advise them as to what they should or should not do, those clients are going to look to you to make judgments for them. And so in terms of ethics, ethics isn't necessarily what's legally required to be done, but it's what's required to be done from a character perspective. So for example, if you're in a car driving down the highway and the speed limit sign says 65 miles an hour, the legal limit is 65 miles an hour, right? And if you don't exceed that limit, then you're complying with the law. You're legally complying with the law. But also, required of you when you get your license is that you need to drive not just the speed limit, but safely. And so you have an ethical obligation to maybe not cut people off when you're driving a car, not swerve in and out of the roads and be reckless, and basically to be smart and to be, a good driver. Those are sort of the ethical requirements of being a driver versus the legal requirements of having a license and not exceeding the speed limit. So as it relates to law, it's very similar. It's legally inappropriate, obviously, or it's legally wrong to steal money from a client, right? But sometimes you get into situations in which a client puts their money with you and trusts you with their money, and how you take care of that money and how you manage that money sometimes is not black and white. And so if you're acting ethically, you're still trying to do what's in the best interest of the client.
Mhm.
The
So
other thing that I would say in terms of ethics and corporate law is when you're negotiating a deal with another lawyer on the other side of the deal, you need to be ethical in the sense that you're transparent, you're doing the best to negotiate your client's position, but you're not trying to do sneaky or inappropriate things to the other attorney to try to get the better deal for your client. You want to be above board, you want to be ethical, you want to be transparent.
yeah, that makes complete sense. So it comes from there's legal perspectives and there's like even if it's like not legal, there's some more ethical perspectives to it. So used driving and then
Et-
money.
right.
Okay.
So ethics, think of ethics like think of when you think of the word ethics, think of another word that's very similar, character. So character is doing the right thing even when nobody's looking. That's an ethical behavior. A legal behavior is to do the right thing because people are looking and you know what the legal line is. And you know, if I cross that line, everyone's going to see me. That's sort of a legal perspective. But an ethical perspective is there's this bright line, but there's nobody there to see you, and you still do the right thing because you have character.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That's actually a really good way to put it. That's like something that no one else has ever said before to me at least. So now kind of moving away from how ethics goes in law, have you in your career done any like ethical stuff like straight up like did you take any classes for ethics or things like that?
So when you're in law school, you take a whole bunch of substantive legal classes for 3 years. And then at the end of law school, you have to take two exams. The first exam is, I'm paraphrasing because I can't remember the exact title of the exam, but it's an ethics exam. So that's a 1 day exam, and you review the legal ethical rules for lawyers. And then you go in and they give you a whole bunch of questions that are ethically based, and you answer those questions. And you have to pass the ethics exam in order to proceed to the next exam, which is the bar exam. The bar exam tests your substantive legal knowledge, things like civil procedure, constitutional law, contracts, real estate. But that's the second phase of the bar of the exams that you have to take. The first phase is the ethics exam, where they give you a bunch of questions that create scenarios where you have to make a decision and what's the right thing to do versus the wrong thing to do. And oftentimes those facts that they give you for a given situation put you in a gray area. And so you have to remember what the what the ethical rules say about certain situations. And then you have to make your decision based on those rules.
Okay, so there's like a test in the end that has a bunch of ethical. All right, so that's how you
Correct.
encountered ethics in your journey to where you are now. So,
Correct.
what would you say? Like, what advice would you have to people who are going to corporate law?
So this is just my personal opinion, but if someone really wants to be a corporate attorney, a business attorney, then I would recommend as when they're younger for them to consider a couple of things that will help them prepare for that. Even before they go to law school, they should take business centric classes, whether in high school or in college. In my case, I majored in business in college because I thought I was going to go into corporate business right away. Um, but then ultimately I evolved into an attorney, but I knew that I wanted to be a corporate attorney. So those business classes helped give me a perspective on the corporate world. And if you're going to be a corporate lawyer that represents business people in the corporate world, it's a good idea to have a base understanding of what they do. So things like accounting, marketing, um, operations, finance, those types of business centric classes will help give you a better perspective of what the corporate world is that you're going to be working in as a lawyer. The other thing I would say is if you want to truly understand how a business operates, go work for a business, part-time, summers, even as a young high school kid. If you want to understand how a business works, get into a business and service business and see how they make revenue, how they manage their expenses, and how they make a profit. And that should give you, I think, a better perspective on corporate activities that you will ultimately end up seeing as a corporate lawyer.
Okay. Um, so now let's talk about Lawgics, like my website. I have been talking about more of those like cases like Brown vs. Board of Education, that small town in Niagara that went through like that chemical waste problem. Uh,
Hmm.
how is there? Do you have any idea how I would implement business into that, or like, yeah, how to implement business into these? Because I haven't been able to find like cases that are like strictly to like business and ethical. So what should I be looking out for?
Okay, that's a good question. Um, so there are a couple of places that you could start to review things that are published, and I can help you with this. But there's something called the Boston Business Journal, the BBJ, and that covers all things business related in Boston. But some of what they cover at times are legal decisions by the state Supreme Court. That's called the SJC, the Supreme Judicial Court. And some of the cases that the Supreme Judicial Court or the SJC reviews, and some of the cases that the BBJ will publish concern corporate issues. Sometimes it's a shareholder suing a business. Sometimes it's a dispute between two corporations about a trademark. Sometimes it's a business that fires a CEO and the CEO sues the business. So there's a lot of different business type cases that the BBJ will publish that come out of the state court system. Another publisher of legal opinions is something called Law 360. And I get that through my law firm, so I think it might be a paid subscription, but Law 360 basically covers all US law, both at the federal and state level. So all the opinions that come out, and they'll give you little summaries of what those different cases are. And so you can pick and choose the ones you want to read. Some of those cases also are corporate related and even ethically related. Sometimes you read a case about a lawyer that gets disbarred because he or she did not act appropriately as a lawyer.
Okay. Yes. That's actually a good way I could look at. Now, let's talk about you and like your ethical values, I guess. Um, one question that like I've been meaning to ask you was like, how do you like this client confidentiality? So how do you
Hmm.
ensure client confidentiality, especially when dealing with sensitive information in a corporate context?
So the easiest way to deal with client confidentiality is you don't speak about it to anybody other than the client and the attorneys that are on your team that are part of your firm. If you follow that simple rule and you keep it just to those two constituencies, you won't ever have a problem um, sharing confidential information in a way that you shouldn't. So lawyers are keepers of secrets, right? That's our job. We keep secrets. And so as long as you just have a rule that, hey, when I'm talking to Shiva, whatever Shiva says to me as the client, it's between him and me and potentially some of the lawyers that work with me that he works with, but I'm not going to talk to anybody else about it, whether it's my friends, my family, other people in business, whatever. I'm just not going to share that. That's the easiest way to follow the rule.
So going back to you saying lawyers are like the secret keepers, um,
Hmm.
how would you handle situations where a conflict comes out of nowhere based on some of those secrets and they involve the the oppo- the opposing side?
Well, look, sometimes if a client shares information with you about them committing crimes or bad behavior, there are ethical rules that say that you have to keep things, there's attorney-client privilege, and you can't go out and tell people about these things. But you're not also as a lawyer and as an officer of the court, you're not supposed to further someone's crimes. So even if they share confidential information with you that creates a conflict in your mind ethically, you have to maintain the confidentiality of it. But it doesn't mean that you have to do additional things that are going to perpetrate a crime or further the ongoing nature of a crime. But you just have to pay attention as to what information is being shared with you and then make that judgment call.
So how do you like so in some scenarios, sometimes people don't tell their lawyers everything. So how do you deal with people who might not tell you the true story and they're leaving out pretty important facts that could help their case? But I think that wasn't the
Well,
case here.
that's a really good question, and the short answer is you don't know until you find out, and when you find out, you should need to say something to the client. And what I would say to the client in that situation is, look, if you want me to represent your best interests, you have to be fully transparent with me about everything that you know, the good, the bad, the ugly. And then it's my job as the lawyer to use that information in an appropriate way to help advance the client's best interests. If they don't share that information with me or they withhold certain things that are important that if they come to light will hurt the client, then the client's just doing a disservice to themselves when they're not being transparent with me.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know one thing about corporate law, like whistleblowers. Like,
Hmm.
how do you approach situations involving whistleblowers and the disclosure of confidential information?
Well, fortunately, I haven't had to, I've never been in a scenario where I've had a whistleblower either come to me or um, have negative information on one of my clients. My clients have all been strong clients and ethical clients, and that's never occurred. But hypothetically, if a whistleblower were to come to me uh, with that type of information, if I'm representing the company, then I might not be the best appropriate person to help the whistleblower. But what I could do is I could refer the whistleblower to the appropriate authorities or another attorney that could work with them in that situation.
Okay. So now, sometimes, like, I've seen this before and I've heard of this before. Um, how do you handle situations where you start to suspect a crime or like even fraud in a company that you are representing, and you suspect it like in the middle of the case, if you have?
Yeah, I mean, that's not happened to me, but if it did happen to me, I would go to the client and I would have a conversation with them and let them know that, look, I think this is going on. It's inappropriate, but I want to give you a chance to explain yourself. And sometimes there are facts missing that might influence me to realize that they weren't actually doing something negative, and so that would be fine. However, if after their explanation I thought that they still were doing something that was fraudulent or criminal, I can withdraw my representation from them. I don't have to continue to represent them. I can't tell
Yes.
people why, but I can certainly withdraw.
Yes. 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 Um, so how do you balance the need for like if you have like the need for strict legal compliance with the desire for balance innovation with the balance of innovation and growth in a business. So how do you like balance the legal part and then the business aspect to it? Because you said that
So,
you were a business major, right? So you
right.
must have like some thoughts about the business.
Well, I do. And so it's a good question. What I would say is people go into business to make money. They're either selling a product or a service. They they work for a company or they form their own company. But the idea at the end of the day is they're trying to sell something that they get paid for. They have to manage their expenses in running the business. And if they can make more than what it costs them to run the business, they make a profit, right?
Yes.
And but some as businesses get become larger and encounter a lot of different situations, there are legal risks out in the world that the business person has to be aware of and has to navigate, get around, manage. Certain lawyers don't like to have any risk, and so they will try to eliminate all risk from a scenario for a client, especially a business client. But that doesn't really work because if you don't have risk, you're not going to have reward. If there's no high risk, high reward, low risk, no reward. You probably want to be somewhere in the middle where you have a certain amount of risk, you understand it, you're willing to live with it. But if you execute the business plan, even with that risk, you'll be successful. If you try to eliminate all the risk, there's no upside and you're not going to make any money. So, as a lawyer, I try to help clients understand the risk, manage the risk, but I try to not be an obstacle so that it prevents them from making money and being successful.
Okay. Yes. Um, that kind of wraps up all my questions that I've had for you. Do you have any questions about Logix?
Yeah. So how long have you had the website?
So I created it earlier this year, so I think around February.
Excellent. And how's it going for you in terms of readers, followers, things like that?
So on the viewer side, it's not been like the highest, but I have been getting like views on my videos. I am, however, starting a newsletter, a weekly newsletter, where I write about like 4 to 5 cases. Maybe put like the newest video or the feature video where like you're probably this interview right now would probably be on that.
Right.
And then I send them out like every Sunday or so, and where people can read up, and then it doesn't come in their spam. It doesn't come anywhere. It just goes straight there, and they just read it. It's completely free, if and stuff like that. So that's what we're starting on right now. We just started working on that, and we got the prototype working, but that's our next steps.
And do you have a sense as to what the average age is of your readers or viewers?
Um, it's gonna be around. We want it to be more like young, like older teenagers, so like
Okay.
17, 18, going to college, like
Yep.
going to
Thinking
college and
about
maybe
college.
pursuing law.
Got it.
Yes,
Well, I commend you on your creativity and your drive, and I'm sure you're going to ultimately be very successful with it.
thank you.
It was a pleasure to speak with you, Shiva.
It was a pleasure to speak with you too, Mr. Zoll. I hope we can. I hope you can come back to the interview again sometime.
You bet. It would be my pleasure.
Thank you so much for
All right. Take care.
you too.